Herman Cain is mad as hell and he's not going to take it anymore. But instead of throwing something at the TV last night, he, of course, tweeted. You tune in for a football game and end up listening to Bob Costas spewing sanctimonious dreck. And today, Mike Huckabee was full of rage against Bob Costas on his radio show, all because Bob Costas, who is the host of Football Night in America on NBC, actually mentioned the biggest thing that happened in football this weekend. It happened Saturday morning when Kansas City linebacker Jovan Belcher shot and killed his 22-year-old girlfriend in front of their 3-month-old daughter and Belcher's own mother. He then drove to work, where he met with his head coach and general manager and thanked them for all they'd done for him. Then he went out in their parking lot, saw police approaching, and shot himself in the head. Football being football, and by that, of course, I mean football being big business, the game, and by that, of course, I mean the big business, must go on. And so, of course, the Kansas City Chiefs played their money-making game the next day. And the football business was hoping that TV football commentators would ignore the biggest thing that happened in football this weekend. But Bob Costas could not.
In the aftermath of the nearly unfathomable events in Kansas City, that most mindless of sports cliches was heard yet again. Something like this really puts it all in perspective. Well, if so, that sort of perspective has a very short shelf life, since we will inevitably hear about the perspective we have supposedly again regained the next time ugly reality intrudes upon our games. Please, those who need tragedies to continually recalibrate their sense of proportion about sports would seem to have little hope of ever truly achieving perspective. You want some actual perspective on this? Well, a bit of it comes from the Kansas City-based writer Jason Whitlock, with whom I do not always agree, but who today said it so well that we may as well just quote or paraphrase from the end of his article. Our current gun culture, Whitlock wrote, ensures that more and more domestic disputes will end in the ultimate tragedy, and that more convenience store confrontations over loud music coming from a car will leave more teenage boys bloodied and dead. Handguns do not enhance our safety. They exacerbate our flaws, tempt us to escalate arguments, and bait us into embracing confrontation rather than avoiding it. In the coming days, Jovan Belcher's actions and their possible connection to football will be analyzed. Who knows? But here, wrote Jason Whitlock, is what I believe. If Jovan Belcher didn't possess a gun, he and Cassandra Perkins would both be alive today.
Today on his radio show, Mike Huckabee rewrote what Bob Costas said, but still attributed it to Bob Costas. Huckabee said Costas went on for several minutes basically trying to make the case for gun control, saying that if we'd only had handgun control, then this crime would have never happened. Of course, Bob Costas never mentioned the phrase gun control, you heard him, or advocated any change in law on his NBC football show. That is not what you just heard. And every word that Mike Huckabee and Herman Cain didn't like was actually written by, as Bob Costas notes, Fox Sports columnist Jason Whitlock. When you read the entirety of Jason Whitlock's piece, which is the first article I've read about football this year, you can see that Bob Costas chose to quote it carefully, specifically leaving out the part on his show, the part where Jason Whitlock does get political, and eloquently so. Here's part of what Bob Costas didn't read from that article. We've come to accept our insanity. We'd prefer to avoid seriously reflecting upon the absurdity of the prevailing notion that the Second Amendment somehow enhances our liberty rather than threatens it. How many young people have to die senselessly? How many lives have to be ruined before we realize that the right to bear arms doesn't protect us from a government equipped with stealth bombers, predator drones, tanks, and nuclear weapons? I, for one, played enough football in high school and watched enough football for years after that to be done with football a long time ago. But I'm glad that Bob Costas and Jason Whitlock aren't done with football. I'm glad they were there this weekend to speak to the football world about the biggest thing that happened in football this weekend. And for Mike Huckabee, Herman Cain, and the Don't Blame the Gun crowd, Mike Lupica had this question today in his column. How many home runs would Babe Ruth hit without a bat?